Today, we think of Hinduism as an eternal religion, somehow unchanged since the days of the Vedas in the second millennium BCE. In fact, much of the marketing around the 2025 Kumbh Mela presented it as a 5,000-year-old practice. But the fact is that the Vedas don't mention pilgrimage at all. So, how did this remarkable tradition evolve? The answer lies in unexpected places in Buddhism, in popular practice, and both medieval and modern advertising. Hinduism is, above all, a religion in motion. More importantly, the loud online proclamations of what Hinduism really is are part of the religion's endless flexibility. The evidence says one thing, but the religious entrepreneurs always say another. So let's begin at the beginning and take it from there. As historian Knut A. Jacobson notes in The Pilgrimage in the Hindu Tradition, the Vedas are barely interested in specific sacred sites. In fact, they're overwhelmingly focused on personal names of gods, sages, and teachers rather than on places. And this kind of makes sense because Vedic ritual is interested in inviting gods to temporary sacrificial halls. There was no conception in early Hinduism of the gods permanently residing in a single place. In fact, it's Buddhist texts that first mention the concept of pilgrimage in India. Early Pali Sutras tell us that in the monsoon season, when monks ceased their wandering in search of alms, they would gather wherever the Buddha was. This practice continued after the Buddha's death, with lay people visiting sites where his relics were enshrined in stupas. By the 3rd century BC, this practice was popular enough that the Mauryan Emperor Ashoka declared in his inscriptions that he'd visited and worshipped at Lumbini, the site of the birth of the Buddha, and he also made various arrangements for pilgrims along highways. Now, in the centuries after, as the Buddha's relics were distributed into more and more stupas, pilgrimage sites sprung up all over the subcontinent, such as Mathura in the Gangetic Plains and Amaravati in the Krishna Godavari Delta. And since many Buddhists were craftspeople and traders, these relics ended up in existing trading centers, leading to a long-running overlap between commerce and pilgrimage in India. These wealthy Buddhist institutions also invested in art and architecture, and all of this would later impact Hindu pilgrimage traditions. From about the 1st century CE, we begin to see the first definite mentions of pilgrimage in Hindu texts, such as the Manusmriti. Oddly enough, though, the Manusmriti in Book 8, verse 92, claims that pilgrimage is not compulsory and displays a marked preference for Vedic rituals. But the mention itself is significant. Clearly, change was in the air, and some Brahmin commentators were taking note. In fact, at Mathura around that time, Hinduism was undergoing a tremendous shift. As one of the regional capitals of the vast Kushan Empire, Mathura was a cosmopolitan center with vigorous exchanges of ideas. Concepts and practices flowed not just between religions, but also between popular and elite traditions. Sculptor workshops at Mathura, accustomed to portraying Buddhist figures and nature deities, developed the first icons of Hindu deities such as Durga and Skanda, like we talked about in this video. Mathura had Buddhist relics as well as the permanent presence of the god Krishna, once the hero of the local Vrishni clan, but increasingly conceived of a cosmic deity. In Before Krishna, Religious Diversity in Ancient Mathura, historian Kanika Kishore Saxena shows epigraphic evidence dating to the 1st century CE of Brahmins building water tanks, gardens, pillars, and stone slabs with images of the goddess Shri. So it seems that especially in cosmopolitan centers, elite Hindus were open to the idea of permanent shrines associated with gods and of facilities to serve pilgrims at these shrines. And within the next century, this popular practice had changed Hinduism itself. As Jacobson writes in Pilgrimage in the Hindu Tradition, in the later layers of the Mahabharata dating to the 2nd to 4th century CE, pilgrimage appears as a fully evolved tradition. Pilgrimages to sacred river fords or tirthas and the feeding of Brahmins at these tirthas are described as generating religious merit. The rewards are presented as superior to the great Vedic sacrifices, including but not limited to the cleansing of all sins, ascent to heaven, riding celestial chariots, and the merit of gifting anywhere from 500 to 100,000 cows, of being born as a son of a goddess, and so on and so forth. Elite rituals were still an important part of Hindu tradition, but pilgrimage granted Hinduism mass devotional appeal, and with it came commercial and financial muscle. It's this version of Hinduism with its charismatic gods and many routes to salvation and power that exploded out into the rest of Asia under the Gupta Empire. Gangetic elites began to build magnificent temples, developing rituals to permanently fix gods there. Brahmin composers assembled compendious Puranas containing myths, legends, and rituals about these gods, and most importantly, lists of tirthas and descriptions of their powers. The brilliance of this Puranic Hinduism, as scholars call it, is that it could easily be picked up and transplanted elsewhere. There could only be one place where the Buddha was born, but there could be a dozen places where a Hindu sage or a god had an adventure, and all of these adventures could then be added back into older legends, as historian Diana L. Eck puts it in India, a Sacred Geography. For example, a famous goddess shrine could be declared a Shakti Pitha, where a body part of the goddess Sakti had fallen. In Hampi or Vijayanagara, the royal Rama temple was declared the site of Kishkinda, one of the kingdoms of the Ramayana. The Pandavas are widely considered to have stayed near many popular sites today. Now we take all these legends at face value, assuming they're proof that Hindu myths were real in some distant past, but they actually tell us the opposite. They show us this brilliant ability of new places to link themselves to older Hindu traditions. This legitimized them and effectively advertised them to pan-Indian audiences. Now, to add to its appeal, Puranic Hinduism was very comfortable with sharing sacred spaces. As historian Michaela Soar writes in her chapter in Ellora Cave Sculpture and Architecture called The Tirtha at Ellora, the waterfall at Ellora was declared a Tirtha, though it already had Buddhist monasteries there. But thereafter, both Buddhist and Hindu temples shared sculptors and patrons who came from the nearby trading town turned pilgrimage center. The growing reputation of Ellora benefited all local religions, drawing patrons from further and further away to commission new structures. Similarly, the reputation of Buddhist sites in North India continued to grow in the medieval period, drawing pilgrims from as far away as Java. But ultimately, the political utility of Puranic Hinduism outpaced Buddhism. As we talked about in these videos, in Tirupati and Puri, the association between gods and kings created vast temple complexes to accommodate thousands of pilgrims. Literary and cultural productions spread the reputations of sites like this, and by the 12th century, Buddhism was well on its way out, and a new religion had arrived in North India: Islam. Just as Hinduism had absorbed ideas from Buddhism, Indian Islam absorbed ideas from Hindu practice. In particular, Indian Islam developed a system of saint veneration at a scale unparalleled in the rest of the world. Muslim sacred sites also popped up near existing Hindu sites, as at Kuldabad near Ellora, or unfortunately on top of them, as at Varanasi. But despite occasional persecutions, major Puranas and texts devoted to pilgrimage were composed in North India in the 16th and 17th centuries. As art historian Catherine B. Asher writes in Making Sense of Temples and Tirthas, Rajput construction under Mughal rule, Mughal armies and caravans connected new markets, allowing sites such as Vrindavan to draw audiences from Rajasthan to Bengal, an unprecedented scale of connectivity. Similarly, Muslim sacred sites such as Ajmer Sharif, which we talked about here, drew pilgrims from the distant Deccan, while, as historian Sunil Amrit shows in Crossing the Bay of Bengal, Tamil Nadu's Nagaur Sharif received pilgrims from as far away as Malaysia. Alongside pilgrimage came commerce, with vast melas growing in Haridwar and Allahabad, and with a growing awareness of the rest of India, early modern North Indian Puranas increasingly mentioned South Indian sites as well. But paradoxically, even as inter-regional connections were growing, we also see a stronger sense of regional identity linked to pilgrimage. Marathi poet saints, for example, promoted Pandharpur as the definitive pilgrimage site for all Marathis. The anthropologist Airavati Karve remarked after visiting the place, quote, "I found a new definition of Maharashtra, the land whose people go to Pandharpur for pilgrimage." And in the 1600s, Tamil language Puranas dedicated to specific temples emerged alongside clear lists of the sacred sites of the Shaivite and Vaishnavite poet saints. These Sthala Puranas dedicated to individual sites listed the legends of these temples and the various boons that visits to them would grant. Today, they're often better known than the actual history of these sites and can be purchased either in pamphlet form or in well-produced coffee table books. By the late 19th century, print media and railway connections led to a massive boom in pilgrimage all over the subcontinent. Simultaneously, notions of a singular Hindu identity also took firm shape. Religious entrepreneurs advertised pilgrimage sites far and wide, but the most hallowed aura belonged to the Ganga River, praised in myth and legend for over 2000 years by this point. And so it was around this time that the Kumbh Mela at Prayagraj became known as the most important of all Hindu pilgrimages, and the state became interested in organizing these vast gatherings, recognizing their commercial and political potential. This continued past independence. Post the 1962 India-China War, military roadworks in the Himalayas increased the popularity of Kedarnath and Badrinath. Pilgrimage texts gradually became intertwined with tourism brochures. Today, the age-old tradition of pilgrimage continues to grow and evolve with new age wellness, spirituality, and nationalism. Where once Sanskrit texts spoke of the glories of tirthas, influencers now broadcast the Mahakumbh in a multilingual chorus. Entrepreneurs offered digital baths, printing out your photos and immersing them in the Prayagraj Sangam. If you have questions or comments, we'd love to hear them. Follow us everywhere on social media. You can find me on Instagram at @Buddha and on Twitter at @Ekanesati. We'll see you next week.